Well, hello there, folks. How are we all doing today? Hopefully, you're all doing absolutely peachy keen, fantastic, wonderful goodness. Today, I'm going to talk about a few different things in terms of like fantasies and stuff like that. Sort of like last time I played Risk of Rain for the channel. I was kind of thinking about like why we play the factions we play, again, because I like thinking about that. Also, I installed these. Look, now there's a snow leopard lady who does things. And now there's a little Frankensaur. I kind of wanted to just do the snow leopard lady because I thought it would be funny because, cat, ultra cat times cat is cat-tastic. Cat squared, if you will. But yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about this, so... Huh. Yeah, man, interesting. Can't really look at her. She has big eyes. It's kind of funny. But, so, I play a decent bit of the tabletop. I've played 68 games now of Warhammer 40k 10th edition. I played a couple of games of previous editions. I played like one game of Ninth. I really hated that game of Ninth. Now, to be fair, I don't know if Ninth would have been better overall, but basically what happened for me is that I joined a game. I was like building my first towel list, and I kind of didn't really know what I was doing, especially in Ninth. I played previous editions, like I played third and fourth a bit. I think I played like one game of fifth. Anyway, but I played some of these editions. And what really kind of got me going was, hey, I really like Tau, and I really like some of the races in his thing. So I decided to try Ninth. Basically what happened was I built a really bad list. But it was, like, obviously bad. Like, if you played Ninth, you would know it was bad, and you could have looked at it and been like, okay, this isn't very good. And I didn't know what I was doing. The thing that annoyed me about that game, though, was that rather than, saying, hey, that because this guy brought, like, a meta list. Like, it was, like, 2 tiny imps, look at them, itty bitties. But basically, he knew from the get-go that he was going to win, and there was going to be no chance of me winning. Essentially, by doing, by playing the game with me, he just knew already that I was gonna lose. And as he looked at my army, he was like, okay, I'm gonna beat this easily. And he brought a Space Marine army that was meta as all hell. No, it was like one of those things where, like, okay, so he charges me, but he doesn't just charge me, because he charged me with this unit, and it was next to this unit, and it had this unit like also near it doing an aura. Like, basically he in one turn just devastated anything he touched, and I had quite literally no chance at all. Now, you could argue whether or not it's his responsibility to tell a new player, like, hey, this list is just going to get you owned, and there's no way around that, really. You're just screwed with this list. Well, he could have, but he didn't, and he just owned me, and then afterwards was like, oh, well, you built a really bad list. It's like, thanks. Why didn't you mention... I told you I was brand new. I've never built a list in 9th. I've only built one list in 8th. Maybe tell me that what I'm doing is not the greatest. Wait, is she like... She seems like she's doing like the grenades faster than normal, but I don't know. So yeah, that was just left a really bad taste in my mouth. And then on top of that, like, it was complicated enough that hey, look at that. Why am I like constantly doing the... Shouldn't I have to... Yeah, I can't actually charge it too. That's interesting. I wonder if I have a mod that changes that? Maybe. But, so yeah, basically that left a really bad taste in my mouth. And then, eventually, I would watch a bunch of content on, playing, 10th edition. And it seemed like it was better. It seemed like the rules were a little bit more balanced. It also seemed like it was way simpler. I really didn't like the thing in 9th where, like, even in that first game, there were just so many stratagems. And the guy's like, well, you have to pick a stratagem. It's like, well, yeah, but there's... You understand that there's quite literally hundreds, it would appear. Or maybe there wasn't hundreds. I don't know how many there were. I know that there was enough that when I first looked at it, I'm like, I have no idea what to choose. And he wasn't giving me any tips on what to choose. So that also, once again, didn't help. But, like, way less stratagems, and the stratagems that are core are pretty easy. You just gotta read them like once or twice and just make sure you remember the little stipulations. Like, Overwatch, you have to be within 24 inches, stuff like that. Nothing too crazy. But then, yeah, I played a bunch of games. Now, Cat played a bunch of games, and when he first played them, this is back before he quit doing druggies. Now I don't do druggies, but for a little while there, I enjoyed some acid or a little bit of marijuana or whatever on occasion. But anyway, and that made playing those games bad, but then I quit, and it was a lot easier. And I played a lot of these games, and I thought it was interesting because I was trying to get the fantasy in my head to match up with like the reality of what I was actually playing and doing. Like, I didn't really want to play any evil factions because I don't like the idea of being evil. And you know, you could make the argument that at least some Space Marines, for instance, aren't necessarily evil, and Imperial Guardsmen don't necessarily have to be evil, and Tau don't necessarily have to be. There's some stuff that you can kind of get away with. And I knew that I didn't want to do Eldar, not because I didn't like Eldar, because Eldar are actually one of my favorite groups in 40k. It was more that everybody was bitching about them being super overpowered, and to my knowledge, I mean, they're still pretty good if you know, specifically if you know how to pilot them. If you don't know how to pilot them, they're kind of a little bit complicated and actually maybe not necessarily the best for a new player, but I think you can figure them out. So yeah, I played a bunch. I played a bunch as Tau. And what was interesting to me was that the fantasy I had was, okay, we're fighting for the greater good, and even though we're still, you know, kind of despotic and stuff like that, I could also play for Farsight and be, you know, good guys and all this stuff. What I realized, though, is that I just didn't like the way that Tau played. As I played a decent amount of games with them, I'm like, I like being aggressive and moving up the board, and I like doing melee, and I like doing whacking and stuff like that. So Tau just don't really do that very well. They're much more like about maneuvering and getting around to like the right things so that you can oh, the thing's just like floating underneath that thing. That's kind of funny. So that you can get the right abilities and things unlocked, and like they're much more about maneuverability and stuff like that. And sometimes it's fun to just go unga bunga up the board and just whack and smack. So, and the more I realized this, it was like, well, I could live my fantasy, which is playing the good guys or the guys who are at least better, and I could try that, but it just ended up being not my thing. And on top of that, I thought they were kind of just boring. Like, Tau on the tabletop don't have the Covenant aspect, which is like my favorite aspect of the Tau, where you get to mix all these different alien races together and you get to have them all do, you know, different things, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. But like right now, at least for 10th edition, from what I've played and seen, it kind of seems like basically battle suits are the only place where you're really going to get anywhere in terms of playing and stuff like that. And ow. Oh, I didn't. That's interesting. I didn't take fall damage there. Hey, die. I would like it if you died. There you go. So, and it's like right now the big thing is crisis suits. Like, I've seen a lot of armies where, like, if you don't bring a bunch of crisis suits, like, you're just probably going to lose. And it's not necessarily you're always going to lose if you don't bring a bunch of crisis suits, but it's like they're kind of like one of the big things. And I played one game with a guy who was pretty cool, but I brought a Chaos army, and he wasn't able to kill my Chaos Chosen before they got up close and personal, and they just got absolutely mauled. I mean, he had Farsight. Farsight charged in. Farsight barely killed. I think he did like a couple of wounds. Like he was doing really bad. And then just like one turn, Farsight dead, Shadow Sun dead, and then like most of their crisis suits in this big block dead because, you know, Khorne Lord with like all his extra strength and attacks and stuff because of Talisman of Blood and, you know, Chance for Glory. And basically, yeah, just got absolutely mauled. But anyway, so I played a bunch of games as Tau, and I tried out a bunch of different ways, and I found that even when I was winning with Tau, I was just kind of bored with them. I didn't like the way they played. It felt like a lot like just sitting there and using my like broadsides or like a hammerhead or something to like take out the big things, and everything else was just you know, like pushing up with crisis suits, and that was about it. I really like Fire Wars. I think Fire Wars are really cool, and I know you can use them somewhat effectively, but I just was, I felt like I really wasn't doing very well with them. And Breachers are kind of fun just because of the amount of shots they get, but once again, it was just like, you know, it just was, I was not enjoying the way they played. I didn't also found that I didn't like they were basically only active in one phase. Like basically, if there was, for whatever reason, a reason you couldn't shoot certain targets. Like if you had like Bellicor with a bunch of lone op, or if you had like, you know, dark obfuscation like you do with Chaos Space Marines, or, you know, stuff like that, or just lone op in general, you just kind of suck. Like it turns out that it makes it really, really hard to actually attack and do things. And it also turned out that with a lot of things, because my stronger guns did not have that much volume of shots, it tended to get kind of bad. And if I just missed even like a couple of shots, essentially I was just sort of screwed, it felt like. And I didn't really like that. So I kind of, and I had, at the beginning of the edition, I played a lot of different factions. I played Tyranids once, I played Genestealer Cults twice, I played Orcs multiple times because I actually ended up liking Orcs a lot. And, you know, I kind of was switching around a lot. I've tried Drukhari as well, and I think I like Drukhari somewhat on the tabletop, but I don't like where they're at right now because a lot of it is just bring the Dark Lances. But anyway, so I've tried out a bunch of different armies, and what I've found is that the army that suits me the best, or the two armies that suit me the best, are Orcs and Chaos Space Marines. Those are the two armies I have the most fun actually playing, and part of it is just because you can do so many little tricks and things like that with like your special... I should probably activate the thingy because I'm just going around talking. But like with all your special skills and things like that, you can... and the marks, the way the marks work together, you can activate all kinds of different marks and get some very interesting stuff going on. I found that was a lot of fun, and I really liked the way units kind of like work together to make interesting things happen. And, you know, like how you can basically take a unit and not completely change its functionality, but you can really change its functionality by giving it different marks and stuff like that. Like, for instance, I bring a Cursed Cultist with Marcus Slanesh, and that's just like gonna, by volume of shots, because Slanesh gives you sustained on 5s and 6s, which is pretty useful, that it can really help out. And with my Khorne guys, I give them... Oh, it's over there, right? Yeah, it's over there. With my Khorne guys, you know, you get lethals on 5s and 6s in melee. Yeah, with Slanesh, it's in melee specifically. And, you know, I found that, you know, even though I'm not really big on Nurgle, I put most of my vehicles with Mark of Nurgle just because, like, it's just the most effective mark. Like, if I give him Mark of Tzeentch, that can do some things, but if my vehicles have, like, las cannons or something, I don't need lethal normally. I'm gonna wound most things just because of strength 12. And, you know, if that's, like, the main weapon they're going for, like, Mark of Tzeentch is just not super effective. And you can do things, and, you know, or, like, you can do stuff with, like, auto cannons, where you can do more shots, and maybe that might be a little bit more effective for lethal just because it's only strength 9, but stuff like that. And I found that, you know, my favorite Chaos Gods are Slanesh and Tzeentch. I think Slanesh can be way more interesting than just the sexy, you know, oh, everything's over the top kind of thing with that specifically. I think you can make some much more interesting things that I think... Oh, wow, did we just get, like, owned? Or did my turrets get owned? I guess they did. Oh, am I about to die? Maybe. But, I found that, like, those two gods, like, the Slanesh marks still have some use to me, but for most of my Tzeentch stuff, I find that it's just not really that useful. And it kind of sucks because it's like, well, oops. For, like, I didn't really get very many items. I think that was part of the problem there. I think I waited a little too long. But, for a lot of my Slanesh stuff, I can still kind of use it, but my Tzeentch stuff just feels kind of useless. It feels like, unless it's on very specific units, like I put it on cultists before, and for certain things, if you just make them take enough saves, they're going to roll some 2s and 1s that, you know, will help you kill some stuff just by, like, whittling them down, and that can be kind of effective. Especially for, like, lower strength, because all their guns are lower strength, it can be pretty effective in that way, and I found that's kind of useful. But, you know, for the most part, like, if I just want to play a list where, like, I'm actually going to do well, and don't get me wrong, I don't have to win But I want the ability to win. I want the ability to actually, you know, kill my enemy and actually, you know, do some damage to them and stuff like that. So you're going to end up taking certain marks over others. And it's like, well, yeah, I could just bring a fun list. But you see, most of the time I'm playing on Tabletop Simulator because I don't have an army anymore. I sold pretty much every warrior miniature I had except for 5 interceptors and this one Alfarius model that I was using as my chapter master because I liked it. And it kind of got me more and more thinking about how, like, my fantasy of an army is all Tzeentch and Slaanesh, or all Undivided. And Undivided is useful, but, you know, like something like that. And basically, I really like playing around with the different fantasies of like how armies should be built and things like that. But I found that with Chaos, if I want to play them effectively, I just kind of can't really play them the way I want to play them. And I feel like with a lot of units, it just like, it gets hard because I mean, look, like I said, I don't have to win, but I feel really weird about like deliberately taking worse options if I know that it's just worse in almost every conceivable way for certain units to take that option. Like if I have like a unit of Havocs, I'm not going to take Mark Tzeentch because las cannon. I'm going to bring 4 las cannons and a guy with a plasma gun to watch him, basically just be extra pair wounds. So it gets kind of weird. Like the meta almost, I realized, was kind of like ruining my fantasy, which, you know, is like half the reason I'm playing 40k. I'm playing 40k because I want to engage in the fantasy of the setting. I want to engage in the idea of being like, oh, we have this like crazy warlord who's going off and doing all these things in 40k. That's what I want to do. And like, I find that I have to kind of deliberately play my army in a different way if I want them to be effective. Because another thing is, like, early on, for my first like 30 games or so, probably, I was just bringing whatever I wanted that I thought was cool. And I was trying really hard to keep with that. But the problem was, in the casual TTS games, because people would say casual, but then you join, and it was not casual. It was not casual sometimes. Sometimes people would bring, like, ball-busting tournament lists that you had basically no real way to beat. And sometimes it was just like that, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm just going to lose this game. And like I said, I don't have to win, but I would like at least the chance to win. I want to feel like I'm participating in the fight, because that's another thing. Fighting against some armies when I was just bringing the things that I thought were cool, sometimes it was basically just, oh, you're going to lose this because you're just not going to have the right damage output, or you're not going to have enough shots to kill these things. And sometimes I was like, well, maybe I may as well just concede before the game even starts, because like, look, with that list that you're bringing, I don't think I can win. And like, and some people would be like, oh, well, maybe I can change my list. And because I've done that a couple times now, where I'm just like, somebody the other day, and he's a very nice guy, but he wanted to bring a list with a Warhound Titan and a bunch of Imperial Guardsmen. Cool enough, and I understand why that would be kind of funny. Thing is, I've played games against like just like one big major unit that's like the main threat, and then everything else is kind of just like you kind of gotta deal with them because they're gonna go take points or something like that. But like, those games are always really boring to me. Like, horribly slanted lists just are not very fun to play, I don't think. Now, that's just a me thing. That doesn't mean that you can't be like, oh, cool, I want to fight the Titan, man. If you want to fight the Titan, cool. It's just, for me personally, I always find those kinds of games not very good. And specifically when I was fighting that guy, I brought my singletons list, which was just, I just wanted to try out the idea of like playing a Chaos Space Marine army, but no duplicates. Everything was just one of anything I brought, I could only bring one of. And so I was trying really hard to make it like just like that. And I don't think the list was super bad for dealing with certain things, but I did think that it was just like, I just don't really want to fight a Titan. Simply put, Titans are just not that much fun to fight. Same thing with Knights, where it's like, hey man, I'm glad that people get to play Knights. I just don't want to fight against them because I just find the game boring. It basically just turns into a thing of, did you bring enough damage to deal with this thing? If you did, it's not going to be that hard. If you bring enough las cannons, Knights aren't that difficult, I've personally found. But if you didn't, and you don't bring enough things that will really like put the hurt on, like a big armored thing, and then you kind of have way more issues, and it just kind of drags out, I find. And I just don't find those kinds of games very fun. But anyway, so but that's what I really found. Is like the first 30 games, I was really trying to bring just cool things that I was like, oh man, I just really like this thing. I like the lore behind this thing. I think this thing is interesting. So I think it's probably worth, you know, bringing out this thing just to try it or whatever. And it was, yeah, like I said, just not super great. I think I can only think of one more place where the Newt altar might actually be. Maybe I didn't check that one area. Okay, anyway, I'll go check this area. But so, with those first 30 games, I just kind of kept getting my ass handed to me, and occasionally I would get kind of lucky with rolls or something, and it would do better. And, you know, I think you can win with a decent, even, like, bad list. But, like, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm not trying that hard. I'm trying to play casual games where I'm just kind of relaxing. And it's kind of about the social aspect more than it's about, like, the winning the game aspect. Not that winning the game doesn't come into it at all, obviously. But, like, you know, like, it's not the main reason we're playing and doing things. So it was just like, okay, well, so then I decided to take a little bit of a break. And then when I came back, I decided to look at tournament lists and figure out what I could bring that would make my list stronger without being like completely broken. What could I bring that really added something to the game and made it so that I felt like I was more of a challenger rather than someone who's just going to go in and get their butt handed to them every single time. And then I found that basically I was almost making lists that were like too powerful. Like then, because then the problem became something more like, oh, there it is. I guess I didn't look back here. But then I was almost bringing things that were like kind of like almost too powerful. Because then the problem became that if someone didn't bring they didn't have to bring like a fully optimized type of list, but they had to bring a list that, you know, was at least capable of putting out some damage and sustaining some damage. And, you know, some people be like, oh, I'm just bringing a fun list. And, like, sometimes when they meant fun list, they legitimately just meant a bad list. Like, a list that I understand that people have fun bringing certain units, and I do as well. But, like, sometimes it's like, if you bring, like, a Gorkanaut, like, I'm almost like, is that actually fun? Like, it's just kind of like a really bad unit, it seems. Now, I'm sure people could play it well if they know what they're doing and things like that. And that might just be a bit of my bias showing through that. I'm like, it just seems like if you bring that, it's going to lose. But basically, that was like one of my big problems is that lists were all over the place. Some people were bringing lists that were like definitely just tournament lists, but then they were saying that they were playing casual, and then they just weren't. Some people were also bringing lists that were like so skewed in a particular direction that it just became completely unfun to play against them. And it's like, okay, look, you're just going to do the same exact thing, and there's no thought in this at all. It's literally just, okay, I'm going to bring like a bunch of Chaos Rhinos and a bunch of Plague Marines and just run them up the board. And it's like, that's just boring to play against. And sometimes you just gotta go, okay, look, maybe you just need to play with particular people or something. Possible. But basically what I found was that by playing the game and trying to be just decent at the game, it would just ruin the fantasy of any army I played. If I wanted to play Drukhari, which I don't know if I really want to play Drukhari because they're real bastards. But I should have bought the fuel thingy. But you know, like say you wanted to play Drukhari. Like right now, if you wanted to bring a really good Drukhari list, or a decent Drukhari list at the very least, you really need to using a skill cooldown reduces all the skill. That can be useful. You really kind of want to do certain things, right? Like you want to bring certain units. You want to be playing the game and... Oh, she's wearing... She has it on her head. That's funny. you really kind of want to be like playing in certain ways and kind of trying to get your armies to do certain things. Sometimes they'll feel like you. I was playing against one person and Dark Obfuscation came up, for instance, which is just on a Nurgle unit, you can basically give it Lone Operative. If the unit has Mark of Nurgle, you can give it Lone Operative. If it doesn't have Mark of Nurgle, you just give it like Stealth. Which, you know, I think that's fine. I think that having that on one unit a turn is not terrible, as long as the person doesn't, like, put literally all of their shots or all of their thoughts in, I'm going to kill this thing, which, you know. And it was like, okay, that's several people told me that was kind of a gotcha. And I didn't really think of it that way because I've kind of felt like a lot of different armies have stratagems that are maybe not quite that powerful, but they can definitely do some interesting things. And if you don't know what you're doing against them, it can really affect the way that you play, and it can really kind of like, oh, well, like if you play against Custodians and you didn't know that if they're on an objective, they can get fights first. Well, you know, that can kind of ruin it if you're like, okay, I'm going to charge him with this unit, and it should be able to do enough damage to kill the thing. It's like, okay, understandable. The thing is, I have very rarely encountered someone who will actually tell me everything their army does. Usually the only reason I know about other armies because I played so much 40k that now, like, I know at least most of the armies I've faced, like, what they can do to a certain extent. And I've read their rules and stuff, so I can just be like, okay, so this is when this works and stuff like that. And since we're playing on Tabletop Sim, what I'll do is I'll just open Battlescribe and build their army exactly as it is, at least as it appears on Tabletop, and I'll ask for clarification on things, what it's equipped with, etc. And then I'll be able to, like, see, okay, because I've had multiple people, and I've done this too, so don't get me wrong, and multiple people like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'll be like, oh, well, that can't actually do that this phase, you have to do it during this phase, or like, oh, you can't use this stratagem right now because this stratagem only works during XYZ time, and most of the time it's just like, they didn't think about it, and it's just like simple ignorance. I've had a couple of people, I don't know if they were trying to cheat, but it seemed like the way they wanted to interpret rules and the way that they wanted to interpret different things going on. Speaking of cheats, I'm going to get myself some money, just because. But basically because of the way they were playing and the way they interpreted rules, it kind of started to make me think, like, okay, it kind of really seemed like you're deliberately trying to do rules that are like, are rule interpretations that are specifically in your favor. And sometimes that's just like legitimately, you know, how people think a rule works. I understand it's a complicated enough game. And yeah, like the more I played it, the more I realized that to be a decent army, except for orcs, I think, but specifically with Chaos Space Marines, like I kind of had to not really embrace the fantasy of what I liked about the army and things like that. I had to deliberately kind of go out of my way to do like, okay, every vehicle has a Nurgle on it. I could give it Tzeentch, but that's just way less effective. Like, Tzeentch is cool to put on some units because with skin shifts you can just bring dudes back. And I still occasionally bring Tzeentch units if I'm bringing just a fluffier list. But generally speaking, like, if I want to be effective on the battlefield, I kind of have to throw aside my fantasy. And to me, that just feels wrong, because it's like, the only reason I'm playing 40k instead of, if I'm honest, I think games with way better rules, because I personally think that 40k's rules are kind of not great, and the way a lot of things work in 40k are just kind of silly. Like the you have your entire army go and then I go type thing, or, you know, vice versa, is, I personally think, just kind of not very fun. And sometimes I think that's what leads to a lot of tabling, is that you cannot respond really to what your opponent's doing. There's a couple of stratagems that let you do things on your opponent's turn, but in most cases, they're not that much of a response. Dark Obfuscation is obviously a little bit of a more of a response than some other things you can get. I just want to see, what does that look like? Hey, don't hurt me! I have friends in high places, you fool. Wait. I can't go in through my own shield? What? I'm almost certain that's not how that normally works. But, well, you know, whatever. And it kind of got more and more to the point where it's like, well, it kind of sucks because like I have this very particular fantasy in my head. Like now my fantasies have changed a little bit in the terms of like now I like this idea of there being like a corn lord who you know is basically kind of like trapped in this void thing by this big monster, and he gets thrown out to fight occasionally, but it's just like, you know, like he doesn't really feel like fighting that much, but like when he gets out there he gets back into the influence of corn. It's like a whole kind of interesting thing, at least I find it interesting, fun stuff like that. But I find that in a lot of cases my fantasies are just like I can't really live them because the way armies are effective like don't really seem like things that are always going to be with your fantasy and stuff like that. And it's kind of like if you want to do, for instance, I want to do more squig hogs, which of course you can't give me too many squig hogs because I already have the ability to take 18 plus 2 squigosaurs and things like that, so I can bring a lot of squigs. Well, actually I can bring a total of 4 squigosaurs if you count the epic hero and the other thing. And then you can bring 3 more squig hogs because you can bring 3. You can do a lot, but it feels like there's a lot more restriction. And just because, like, well, if you're not okay with just losing every single time, you can only bring armies that are so good and stuff like that. And some of this will change because like it's kind of like Drukhari. Drukhari at the end of 9th edition, from my understanding, were really powerful, but right now they're not super great, and there's like basically only a couple of ways I've seen that feel like they're actually very good at playing them. Or like if you want to bring certain armies, like you're gonna have to skew the list certain ways if you want to be effective. And yeah, sometimes we can do just fun stuff, but like if I want to have even a chance of winning, sometimes it's like really difficult because you kind of like I said, gotta be willing to take a certain amount of losing and stuff like that. And some people, like, it's perfectly fine for them in the sense that they're not that bothered by like, oh, I'm not that bothered by losing, and you know, I can just play all the time. It's like I'm not super bothered by losing most of the time, but like if it happens a lot, and I did find that occasionally, I don't know what it is, but 40k just activates my competitive side more than a lot of other games. And I'm really not sure why this is. It was the same thing with Infinity, where like I found that I would enjoy the fantasy of building the army and stuff like that, but then I would get it on the table and I just wasn't having fun. It almost always turned to a thing, at least for me, where it's like, okay, I'm either completely stomping or getting stomped, and it's just like, it's just not very fun. So I just stopped playing Infinity altogether. I have the books, I read the lore still, I still think about it from time to time. I think it's good, but it's one of those things. And so now I'm kind of in this point with Chaos where I'm like, okay, I win a decent bit, but I'm kind of bored with the way this plays. I feel like I have fairly limited options if I don't want to have just like a bad time. And you know, this is also largely dependent on who you're playing against. Part of my problem is simply that I'm playing against randoms, so I can't tell what they're going to bring. They could be bringing an army that is like completely meme garbage, but you know, fun for them, which is good. Or they could be bringing like something that's like, oh, this is casual, but then you look at it, it's like one of the sweatiest lists you've ever seen. It is like very clearly, like if you look at tournament lists, which I have for various different factions, because now I just like to be familiar with what people are bringing. They're going to bring stuff that's like, okay, this is going to blow up like 8 units or whatever. It's going to kill a lot of things, and this is like the most effective unit, and it's going to be really hard to kill. So you kind of have to change your strategy to reflect that. I want the clover. Clover's fun. So you got to change your strategy to reflect that, right? And it's like, okay, so that means that I got to bring different things here and all that jazz. Or like it's like, okay, so basically what I've started to do now is just build multiple armies, and I have, you know, I have a couple of orc lists, I have a couple of chaos lists, and the orc lists and chaos lists, I'll basically have one that's, well, now I have like 3 of each, honestly. But I'm like, I'll usually bring one that's like much more memey and just fun to play. And then I'll bring one that's a little bit sweatier, that's a little bit more likely to actually, you know, stop my opponent and like, you know, hurt like put some herd out on them and stuff like that. And I'll be willing to, you know, bring stuff that I think is more effective or going to be more effective. I should have just done the shaped glass, honestly, but, you know, it's fine. Gib. And, you know, that has helped the problem a little bit, where it's just like, okay, well, look. If the other person is bringing an army that is like, do I just have no fall damage? Does this character just have no fall damage? That's not correct. Maybe the skin is doing weird. Maybe the skin's doing weird things. I guess it must be because, well, I don't know. I could play on a regular engineer and see if it's doing the same thing. Because there should be fall damage. There should be a bunch of things going on. But and yeah, that's helped a little bit, where it's like, okay, if my opponent brings like a really sweaty list, then it's just like, okay, so yeah, we can't go with my fantasy fun list. We're going with, okay, this is the list that will actually be able to put out damage and hurt them and do stuff like that. And that's kind of that's kind of where my dilemma is like, I would like to play the fantasy. That's the main reason I play 40k instead of other games, is that like the fantasy is like the best part about it. The fantasy is what makes it fun. Like, if I just wanted to play Number Simulator, where we're just like, basically, are your numbers high enough to beat my numbers? And it's like, I can play a billion different games to do that with, and it's like, it's just not very interesting. But yeah, I think the biggest problem is that playing with randoms, which any game you do this really affects the experience. And most people are all right, but like a lot of people will deliberately be playing games that I just don't want to play. Like, we're just like, yeah, I want to bring Warhound Titan. It's like, you know what? I'm sure plenty of people would find that plenty cool. To me, that is an incredibly boring game to just like, hey, I have basically one thing that's really a threat and everything else is kind of eh. It's like, okay, sure. And it's not like that's necessarily the worst thing ever. I just want to see if I... Oh, I was kind of hoping that their hat would just put on top of the blender. You know, for me personally, that's just like a lame list to fight. I don't want to fight that, because it basically just turns into, do I kill this thing this turn? No? Okay. Because most of the infantry stuff, like, it's not that hard to kill. And it just turns into stuff like that. Or like, oh, hey, yeah, do you want to play a casual chill game? Sure, let's play a casual chill game. I get in there, and it's just like the sweat. It is just a tournament list. It is exactly a tournament list. And it's just like, oh, well, I don't want to play this. I just kind of don't at that point. And it gets kind of hard, because you can't just be like, hey, it gets to a point where you're almost have to tell everybody, like, you're playing against, or it feels like a lot of people I played against, like, hey, let's not. And it's like, now, to be fair with the Warhound guy, he was nice enough that just to clarify, he was nice enough that I was like, hey, I don't want to play against the Warhound. He had another list. And that's an easy solution. Sometimes people have that, but like, it gets kind of weird to be like, hey man, I don't want to play against your list, because some people also only have like a couple lists at a time. Like, they only have like, well, this is the list I wanted to try. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, I guess have good luck finding somebody else. And you know, that's not like sarcastic, like legitimately, it shouldn't be that hard to find somebody else who'll be willing to play it. But it's like, look man, if I just see a list and I'm just like, hey, this is not gonna be fun, like, okay, well then I guess just, yeah, it's weird the way her primary should not work like that, but you know what I mean. And it's like, okay, so like my fantasy are basically like, okay, so the Space Marines with my Roof Drakes were like part of my fantasy, right? But simply put, the way Space Marines play on tabletop, don't want to play them. They're just boring. Then it was also the same thing with Tower. It's like, look, the way they play on the tabletop is just not for me. It's not the fun way. It's not the way I like to play. If you like playing Tau, great. And if you like playing them different ways, whatever, awesome. But it's like, I'm finding that like one of the worst parts of like 40k in terms of fandom and stuff is like actually trying to interact with the tabletop. Like the tabletop itself feels like where a lot of my fantasies go to die, and it also feels like where a lot of the more interesting ideas in 40k just are non-existent, and it just turns into often just a numbers game. Now, of course, there's also something that's important to understand, which is that like a lot of things will seem kind of broken or seem like really powerful in bad napkin math, but like, you gotta understand, since it's a dice game, sometimes you just roll bad, and sometimes those sweaty armies I've been playing against, like sometimes the reasons I'll beat them is just because they'll just roll a bunch of ones. Sometimes it just happens, and they'll just like, okay, I just roll a bunch of ones. Well, I want to command reroll that, and it's like, well, once you establish the command reroll, it's only one die, just one, or one roll in terms of like a charge. You can reroll the charge in that case. But like, when it's just like one roll, like, hey man, yeah, maybe you'll hit instead of completely missing every shot. And you know, sometimes you'll find that the game. Oh yeah, the Wayfarer. This is like a boss creature that I basically installed in the mod. He's pretty cool. Although right now I feel like I must be very well. I guess I gave myself a ton of money, so excuse me. Increase my DPS and things like that. And you know, like it's just kind of interesting because like on one level I would almost think that like you would think that the tabletop would be the best place to engage in fantasy, and like it should do better for the fantasy, you would think, but it just ends up, at least in my experience, have been the exact opposite. And you know, some of this is just like the way it is right now because most players are still using an index, and you know, the codexes are a little bit better about giving you more options. But to be perfectly honest, for a couple of our armies, it doesn't seem like, well, very specifically for AdMech, it doesn't seem like it fixed most of the core problems with AdMech. So if you want to play AdMech, you're still kind of, you know, shit out of luck. Partially, although that's also just because of cost more than anything there. Like, AdMech is just so ridiculously expensive, it's not even worth considering. And it's another reason that I only play on Tabletop Sim is that I just don't want to spend the prices on GW models, but I think I've established that at this point by my videos where I'm talking about how bad the pricing actually is. But yeah, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about my experience and how it's like, it feels weird because it's like, I want to be playing with my fantasies, I want to be playing with the units I like, but it feels like a lot of them are just, because of current balance issues, just kind of untenable. And like, if you want to play like particularly fluffy lists, I've noticed that at least, and now this might be just especially a problem on Tabletop Sim, but especially in Tabletop Sim, it's just hard because people will bring armies that are like meant specifically to like destroy anything that they face against, and it's like, you can really tell that some people just enjoy building the strong army, and it's like, that's cool. I can relate to a certain extent. I want an army that's like, you know, at least mostly strong. I want armies that can win, but I also don't necessarily want to just stop my opponent because that's also kind of boring. I had one game against an orc player where I was bringing what I thought was a pretty subpar Drukhari list, but they brought a Gorkanaut and just a bunch of Mega Knobs. Problem with that, I could see the Gorkanaut turn 1, and I just blew it up. And then I killed, I think, half of his Mega Knobs in 2 squads, and I killed some bubble guns because he brought some mech guns, and I killed a bunch of stuff. And then it was like handing over to him. I was like, oh, well, he's going to charge me now, and I'm going to be in for a world of hurt. Because anything that those Mega Knobs touch is going to get basically deleted. And then he conceded because I blew up most of his army turn 1. It's like, I understand that, and it's also like, that's not really that much fun for either of us, I don't think. And that wasn't even a particularly gotcha list, I don't think, because I brought 2 Talos and just like a couple of Ravagers, I think. Yeah, I think the Ravagers were where most of the Dark Land shots are coming from. And the Talos isn't that great. I just brought it because I thought it was a big, fun, big pirate ship, and it looks like almost like a Romulan vessel to me, to a little bit, or maybe like a Klingon ship. It's just like very sharp and spiky, and basically just a flying sword, which I think is kind of funny. But yeah, so I just wanted to share some of the experiences I had, and just, you know, talk a little bit about how it's kind of unfortunate that, like, you know, the fantasies I want to live out with my armies, I kind of can't. And some of that is just, hey, this is the way certain armies play, so that I can't get too mad at that. Hey, if I'm just, you know, hey, if the way they work in my head in like terms of fantasy doesn't work on the tabletop, that's one thing. But if it's another thing where it's just like, oh, well, you could take this fantasy unit, it's just that it's just going to be weaker than if you brought anything else. And it's like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. But anyway, I think you guys should like let me know your opinions below, and I think you guys should you know, let me know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe this is just a tabletop sim problem, specifically because there's very little barrier to just meta chasing like crazy. Because you know everything's free, so you just pop in, you bring whatever you want. Anyway, I hope that you all have an absolutely wonderful day, and I hope that you know that I love you and God loves you, and bye-bye, I love you, bye. Have a great one.